Beverly Hills, the Langham Huntington Hotel. Crystal lamps reflect their brilliance onto wine glasses when he enters, arm in arm with his proud young mistress. All eyes turn toward them until the door opens one more time. His lawful wife appears, dressed in an elegant gold gown that shines like the dawn, her gaze serene yet icy. She doesn't need to say a word. A single smile from her is enough to silence the entire ballroom. The night, which was supposed to be his, changes in a matter of seconds. Power is inverted, secrets are revealed, and false love crumbles under the flashes of the cameras. This is not just a party. It is the moment when justice speaks. How do you think this night of betrayal will end? Leave us your comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that reveal the true price of arrogance. A perfect house doesn't always contain a perfect marriage. That morning, Eleanor's coffee tasted like a lie. The April light streamed through the large windows of their Malibu penthouse, bathing the marble in a clean glow that failed to warm the air. The table was set with the same impeccable order as always, the bread cut into triangles, the butter on its silver dish, the freshly brewed coffee releasing a bitter aroma. Marcia Brooks, the young, discreet assistant, left 2 envelopes on the entrance console and retreated with soft steps, leaving behind the echo of a home where silence had replaced love. Eleanor sat down slowly, holding the cup with both hands. A thin film of foam floated on the coffee's surface, breaking as she exhaled. She observed the envelopes. The first, with elegant calligraphy, bore both their names, Mr. and Mrs. Robert Vance. The second, smaller, read, Mr. Robert Vance and companion. The blue ink seemed to mock her. She showed no gesture of rage. She simply leaned the envelope against the edge of the table and took another sip. The taste confirmed what she already knew. There was something rotten beneath the varnish of routine. Marcia returned with a fresh refill. "Anything else for today, madam?" she asked timidly. "Just keep the coffee hot, dear, and make sure no one else sees this envelope." Marcia nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Eleanor waited to hear the click of the service door before opening the letter. It was the invitation to the Hope Foundation Gala, the most anticipated event of the California spring, featuring the usual list of bankers, politicians, and bejeweled wives. Her husband was the honorary vice president, and every year he would take the stage to thank the donors. She, as always, was expected to smile. But this year, he planned to arrive accompanied. She rested her elbows on the table, looking at the wall clock that marked 7:30. That time had become a kind of signal for weeks. The time Robert left with an excuse of a meeting or a working breakfast. The scent of his cologne, that dry, woody smell, still lingered in the room, now feeling alien to her. Eleanor took a deep breath and stood up. She took a light coat and went out to the Santa Monica Beach Park. The park was waking up with the city. Early runners crossed the paths, gardeners watered the flower beds, and the air smelled of damp grass and toasted bread from nearby cafes. Eleanor walked unhurriedly, gloves in one hand, her mind elsewhere. She observed an elderly couple walking arm in arm, laughing about nothing. She felt a pang of quiet envy. True love doesn't hide, she thought, and in that moment she knew she wouldn't cause a scene. She would make a plan. Back home, she entered her study, a space ordered with almost surgical precision. She opened a finance folder and began reviewing the bank statements. Each expense had its column, each trip its receipt. She found receipts for restaurants she didn't remember, flowers sent to an unknown address, a piece of jewelry purchased on Rodeo Drive. The evidence formed a clear mosaic. The betrayal had a name, dates, and a price. She felt no rage, only a new calm. as if her body had finally aligned with her soul. In a drawer, she kept a card she hadn't used in years. To Alex Montgomery, corporate attorney. She took it out, looked at it for an instant, and placed it next to the phone. The clock marked 11 when Marcia poked her head in. "Would you like me to prepare lunch?" Eleanor smiled slightly. "No, thank you. I won't be having lunch here today." Her voice was so serene that even the young woman perceived a change. She closed the door slowly. Eleanor stood up, crossed the living room, and stopped in front of the large mirror near the window. Her reflection showed a woman of 48, elegant posture, steady eyes, and a sadness that no longer asked for pity. There were no tears, only purpose. To reclaim her place, her name, her peace. At noon, the landline rang with its paused chime. Eleanor let it ring 3 times before answering. It was a warm, masculine voice that didn't need to introduce itself. "Alex, it's Eleanor," she said, with the naturalness of someone stating a decision. "I need you to come today, and I need you to bring an empty agenda." She hung up without adding anything more. In the street, the roar of traffic filled the air. Inside, the clock continued marking the exact time between the deceit and the truth. You don't have to shout to make an empire tremble. Sometimes just making a statement in the right place is enough. Eleanor let those words resonate in her mind as the car slowly drove down the Pacific Coast Highway. Los Angeles was boiling under a clear spring sun, and on the terraces, the waiters moved as if time didn't exist. The woman looked through the window at the stately buildings, the banks, the elegant stores. Everything was the same, but she was no longer the same. She had made a decision, one that demanded calm and precision. The elevator in the downtown building stopped on the 12th floor with a metallic sound. Eleanor crossed the carpeted hallway and pushed open the door to Dr. Alex Montgomery's office. The attorney greeted her standing up, with a slight professional smile and attentive eyes behind his glasses. "Mrs. Eleanor, what a surprise after all this time," he said, inviting her to sit. The office smelled of leather and coffee, civil codes, old conference photographs, and framed diplomas lined the shelves. Eleanor set her purse on the floor, took a deep breath, and replied, "I've come about a personal matter, a very personal matter." The attorney instantly understood that it wasn't a courtesy visit. He took out his notebook and leaned toward her. "What has happened?" he asked. Eleanor looked at him without trembling. "My husband has ceased to be my partner, in every sense of the word. I want order, Alex, not a spectacle." He nodded slowly. "There will be order, Mrs. Eleanor, but if he makes it public, you cannot disappear." They spent more than an hour reviewing statutes and shares. Montgomery precisely explained the legal options, the risks, the advantages. Eleanor listened without interrupting, noting names, dates, and instructions. At times, the noise of LA traffic entered through the open window, mixing with the attorney's deep voice. When they finished, he closed the folder and looked at her with respect. "Not all women face this with such serenity. Are you sure about what you're going to do?" Eleanor smiled with a strange calm. "I have never been so sure of anything." The attorney leaned slightly toward her. "Then we will start by discreetly moving the company shares into your name. The rest will come naturally." She nodded and stood up. Before leaving, she placed a card with her signature on the desk. "I will call you when everything is ready." Outside, the Beverly Hills air seemed warmer. Eleanor walked toward the sidewalk, where a group of men in dark suits chatted under the sun. She didn't look at them. Her car was waiting for her in front of the building, but she decided to continue on foot. With every step, she felt how the city's noise helped her think. She passed by a flower shop, and the scent of gardenias enveloped her. She suddenly remembered a time when Robert used to bring her flowers on Fridays. She closed her eyes for a second and continued walking. Her phone vibrated in her purse. It was Martha Jones, her distant cousin, a regular in LA social circles. Martha's voice sounded excited, full of enthusiasm. "Eleanor, did you get the invitation to the Hope Foundation Gala? We need you on stage this year. It's going to be a wonderful event. You and Robert are the soul of the foundation." Eleanor stopped walking, watched the traffic, and replied with an impeccably neutral tone. "I'll see you there, Martha." She hung up before the other woman could add anything. She knew that this gala would be the perfect stage, and she was already starting to imagine the scene. Hours later, as evening fell, she met again with Montgomery on a terrace in the Arts District. The air smelled of red wine, garlic, and olive oil. At nearby tables, tourist couples laughed as waiters brought plates of food. Alex unfolded some documents and turned them toward her. "I've spoken with the auditor. Robert's transfers have cracks. If he continues, he'll sink himself. You must remain untouched, as you have been until now." Eleanor sipped sparkling water. "I hope so, Alex. I don't want revenge. I want balance." The attorney smiled wryly. "That, Mrs. Eleanor, is what differentiates a strong woman from a vengeful one." For a few seconds they remained silent, watching the sky turn orange over the LA rooftops. Then she took a small leather-bound notebook and jotted down 3 words. Langham, dress, silence. Alex watched her curiously. "Are you going to attend?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, without taking her eyes off the paper. "I will go to the gala, and not just to watch." That night, back home, she went up to the attic and opened a carved wooden box with the family crest. Inside, wrapped in velvet, was the Vance tiara, an antique piece of jewelry that had belonged to her grandmother. She held it between her fingers, feeling its weight and history. Her face was reflected in the closet mirror, half shadow, half decision. Her cell phone vibrated on the table. It was a message from the fashion atelier where she ordered her suits, a photo of a newly finished gold dress with a simple text. "This color, madam?" Eleanor looked at the image for a long time before replying. Finally, she wrote, "Yes, that one." Then she turned off the phone and stayed looking out the window. Outside, Los Angeles slept under a clear sky, unaware that its upcoming gala would change more than just appearances. Los Angeles shone that night, as if the sky had descended to reflect on the golden facades of the Langham. Cars lined up in front of the hotel, and flashes illuminated the main entrance. It was the Hope Foundation Gala, the most anticipated event of the spring. In the royal ballroom, the crystal lamps returned flashes that looked like captive stars. The maitre d', impeccable in his white jacket, greeted guests with a precise smile. Everything was luxury and pretense, Robert Vance's natural territory. Robert arrived holding Isabella Cavallo's hand. He wore a black tuxedo that fit him like armor. She wore a deep blue dress with an elegant neckline and a nervous expression disguised behind a learned gesture. "Are you sure she won't come?" Isabella whispered as they climbed the carpeted steps. Robert leaned toward her slightly, with his usual smile. "She's indisposed, don't worry. Tonight is ours." Cameras captured the image of the couple entering the ballroom. The LA elite turned their heads and greeted him with a murmur of approval. Inside, the tables were decorated with white lilies and fine crystal glasses. The chamber orchestra played a slow waltz. Waiters moved between the tables, offering hors d'oeuvres and glasses of wine. Robert greeted acquaintances, shook hands, feigned security. But every time someone mentioned his wife's name, his jaw tightened. Isabella noticed it and squeezed his arm sweetly. "Relax, Robert. Everything will be fine." He responded with a forced smile, but his gaze was lost for an instant toward the entrance. Meanwhile, a few yards away, in the hotel lobby, The revolving glass doors slowly turned. The murmuring of nearby guests faded. Eleanor Vance appeared, wearing a long, pale gold gown. The shimmer of the fabric mingled with the light, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. She wore her grandmother's tiara, that antique piece of jewelry that reflected dignity more than vanity. She walked with a calm step, her small clutch purse hanging from one wrist. The maitre d', recognizing her, inclined his head slightly. "Good evening, Mrs. Eleanor," she replied with a serene voice. "Thank you. The orchestra? The opening waltz, please." She entered the royal ballroom without haste. The noise transformed into a distant hum. Martha Jones, radiant in a green silk dress, saw her first and gasped. "Eleanor, you look stunning, darling. I didn't know you were coming. Will you say a few words tonight?" Eleanor looked at her with a smile that showed not an ounce of doubt. "I'll say what's necessary, Martha." She walked to a nearby table, where Robert's eyes finally found her. The man paled for an instant. Isabella, noticing his tension, turned her head. Seeing the lawful wife, her breathing caught in a gasp. Eleanor took a glass of water and sat down, as if nothing had happened. She spoke briefly with a couple of friends. She smiled at the photographer who hesitated before approaching and waited. The orchestra changed its rhythm. The violins began a recognizable melody, and the master of ceremonies gently tapped his glass to call for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Hope Foundation, we thank you for your generosity. Tonight, we have the honor of inviting Mrs. Eleanor Vance to say a few words." Eleanor stood up. The sound of chairs and the murmur of surprise swept through the ballroom. She walked toward the stage with the elegance of someone unafraid to be observed. Along the way, she crossed paths with Robert. She felt the trembling in the air, a tension that could almost be touched. She climbed the 3 steps that separated her from the microphone and paused for a second. The light from the spotlights reflected on her dress, and her voice, when she spoke, sounded clear, unhurried. "Good evening. Let's talk about the truth." For a moment, no one breathed. In the front rows, some smiled without understanding, expecting a typical speech. But the way Eleanor held the microphone and the calm on her face indicated that something different was about to happen. "For 22 years, I accompanied my husband in this cause, believing in solidarity and honesty. Today, I want to talk about both words." Robert gripped his napkin tightly. Isabella looked down. Eleanor continued, without raising her voice. "Love and trust are also acts of faith. When they are broken, they are not restored with money or speeches, but with truth. And the truth, sometimes, is uncomfortable." She took a step forward. "Tonight, I want to thank you all for your support, and also to announce a change. Effective immediately, I personally assume the direction of the Foundation's social works and the administration of Vance and Associates, whose management will undergo a review process." A murmur spread like a wave. Martha watched her with her mouth agape. Robert half rose, but the maitre d', with an imperceptible gesture, signaled him to remain seated. Eleanor took a sealed envelope from her clutch purse and placed it on the podium. "Here is the document certifying the transfer. Dr. Montgomery, present among you, vouches for it." The silence became dense. The orchestra had stopped playing. Eleanor looked directly at Isabella. "I would also like to thank a special person, who unknowingly showed me that mistakes can teach us more than successes. Isabella Carvalho, would you join me?" The young woman took a few seconds to react. All eyes were on her. She stood up, her legs trembling, and walked onto the stage. Eleanor took her arm and, for the first time, smiled genuinely. "Don't be afraid. Everything passes when you face the truth." Eleanor turned to the audience. Sometimes, life forces us to start over. Tonight, I lose nothing, ladies and gentlemen. I merely set myself free. The room fell silent. The light seemed more intense, the air thinner. Robert took a step forward, but she stopped him with a look. She slowly descended from the stage, leaving behind the echo of her words and a murmur of astonishment that mixed with the clinking of a glass in the maitre d's hand. The orchestra resumed a soft tempo, but no one danced again. Robert remained motionless. Isabella wept silently. Martha tried to recompose a smile. Eleanor, already in the lobby, asked for her coat. The maitre d' bowed and handed her a single white rose. She accepted it, grateful. She looked one last time toward the ballroom, where the golden lights still burned like silent witnesses, and whispered to herself. This was the first truth of many. Outside, the LA night breathed calmly, as if it had just witnessed the end of a lie. When everyone dances to the rhythm of luxury, only one woman listens to the beat of her conscience. Eleanor had just left the stage. The maitre d' had called for silence, and in the air, the expensive perfume mixed with fear. The royal ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Lamps paused in their brilliance, glasses half raised, fans motionless on gloved hands. Eleanor approached the microphone with a step that was neither hurried nor slow, but precise. Her grandmother's tiara barely trembled above the pale gold of her dress, and her gaze swept the front row, where Robert, rigid, held a napkin as if it were a life raft, and Isabella, her lips pressed, searched for a fixed point on the floor to avoid feeling dizzy. "Good evening," Eleanor said, and her voice came out clear, like the edge of a crystal glass. "Thank you for your presence, for your generosity, and for believing, year after year, that hope is not just a word, but a mission." The murmur that followed was brief, almost a reflection of politeness. She waited for the last spoon to be still against the edge of a cup, and then added, "Today I do not come to repeat the usual. I come to say what is necessary." The orchestra held its bow in the air. From a side table, Martha Jones leaned toward a friend, but didn't speak. Her eyes said it all. Eleanor inhaled, looked toward the back, where some hotel staff watched the scene from the doorways, and continued. The Hope Foundation was created to support those who fall. Tonight, for the sake of coherence, we must also support the truth. There was a small noise, like a glass touching the tablecloth again. For 22 years, I have accompanied my husband in this cause. I have laughed by his side at these tables. I have applauded from this very ballroom. Today, I have decided to do something different. She rested her hand on the podium, the other on the small clutch purse that held a sealed envelope. I announce the creation of a permanent aid line for women who, like many, need to start over. And from tonight, I personally assume the direction of the Foundation's social programs. The applause broke out in relief, as if the audience had found a familiar path. Eleanor let it last for 3 seconds, and on the 4th, she raised her hand slightly. The applause died down out of old obedience. "There is a second piece of news," she said, with a serenity that made more than one person's skin prickle. "The family company, Vance and Associates, will undergo a review and reorganization process. I have requested an independent audit. Starting tomorrow, financial movements will be under supervision." Robert, without thinking, pushed his chair back. The maitre d' took a step, and his silent shadow was enough to make him sit down again. "I want to thank the minority shareholders who have trusted me in recent months," Eleanor added. And at the next table, a bank director moistened his lips with a grimace of caution. "I am not here to accuse anyone. I am here to state that trust must be managed, just like numbers, with transparency." She opened her purse and placed the sealed envelope on the podium. Here are the documents certifying the transfer of ownership and the corresponding guarantees. Dr. Montgomery, whom many of you know, is present and can certify what I declare here." Alex Montgomery's silver head discreetly appeared from a middle table. He raised his chin as a greeting. Eleanor then turned her gaze toward Isabella, who had lowered her eyelids as if the light hurt her. And now she spoke with a sweetness that was not ironic. "I would like to invite a person who has learned, perhaps too quickly, that mistakes teach. Isabella Carvalho, would you join me?" A collective sigh swept through the ballroom. Isabella got up with a rustle of fabric, climbed the steps as if they were water, and stopped next to Eleanor. The young woman trembled, but held her posture. "Don't be afraid," Eleanor whispered to her, without the microphone picking it up. Isabella nodded with a single, tiny gesture. Eleanor addressed the audience. "Tonight is not about exhibiting guilt, but about taking responsibility." There was an imperceptible movement in the front rows, old politicians straightening up, wives exchanging glances. Love without truth is fraud, and fraud has legal consequences. The phrase fell with an ancient weight. Some swallowed, others twisted the ring on their finger. I have placed these facts in the hands of professionals. There will be no shouting, no sensational headlines. There will only be what is appropriate. Order, she pointed to the envelope. This is enough to begin. In the corner of the ballroom, two accredited journalists exchanged a look, but did not dare to take out their notebooks. The master of ceremonies clutched the program card like someone clutching a handkerchief. Robert stood up. Now he did, and his voice, small for the size of his ego, reached the stage with difficulty. "Eleanor, please, let's talk downstairs." She looked at him with both pity and authority. "We will," she said, "when I finish speaking." The audience held back a murmur. Eleanor inclined her head toward Isabella. "Ms. Carvalho has cooperated, as far as possible, to clarify certain operations. I am not going to ask you to judge her. I am going to ask you for something more difficult, to remember that no one is exempt from making mistakes, and that nevertheless, there is always a door to dignity." Isabella gasped for air, and in a burst of courage brought her mouth close to the microphone. "I made the worst mistake, believing I was essential, believing I was loved. I'm sorry." Her voice broke. Eleanor held her hand for a second, a brief, sufficient gesture. "Thank you," she said, and gently moved her away from the exposure, so the humiliation would not be prolonged. This foundation is called hope for a reason. From now on, we will honor its name inside our homes, too. The applause that followed was not unanimous. It was respectful, almost reverent. The orchestra, obedient, did not yet resume the tempo. The air felt colder. Eleanor decided to close. "To those who have walked with us all these years, thank you. To those who need help, we are here. And to those who have confused loyalty with silence, let them know that the silence has ended." She took a step back, retrieved the envelope from the podium, and put it away. At the tables, the glasses barely vibrated. Martha, with wet eyes, brought her hands together as if praying. Robert, motionless, calculated exits that no longer existed. His damp fingers left a shiny trail on the crystal glass. Eleanor descended from the stage. The maitre d' advanced a step, and with impeccable deference, clinked his glass 3 times. The sound cut through the ballroom like an ancient instruction. The waiters, out of routine, took half a step forward. Then, seeing the seriousness of the moment, they returned to their places. Isabella stayed up there for a moment longer, looking out at the city through the windows, and then carefully descended. A group of guests tried to approach Eleanor to congratulate her. She smiled politely, gave 2 or 3 thanks, and asked for her coat in a low voice. The gold fabric of her dress shimmered when she turned toward the lobby. In the anteroom, an arrangement of lilies let out a clean perfume that cut through the heavy mix of the ballroom. The revolving door revealed the LA night as a dark, gentle lake. Eleanor took a deep breath. She had done what she had to do in front of everyone. The most difficult part remained, talking without an audience. Behind her, she heard Robert's hesitant step, and Isabella's lighter one, and a little further away, the rustle of Alex's jacket, discreet, always at the exact distance. Then she stopped, turned slowly, looked at him, and for the first time that night spoke to only one person, with a voice that didn't need to be raised to become law. "I'll see you in the private room, Mr. Vance. We will talk about justice there." The private room at the Langham had the air of a confessional. The lights were dimmer, the perfume from the main ballroom did not reach it, and the echo of the gala was reduced to a distant murmur. Robert entered first, still with his tie knot tight, his face tense with rage and disbelief. Eleanor was already waiting for him, standing next to a round table, her hands resting on an envelope she hadn't let go of since the stage. Behind her, Dr. Montgomery remained silent, like a shadow who was only there to ensure that the truth was not twisted. Robert broke the silence. "What the hell have you done, Eleanor? You've destroyed my reputation in front of all of Los Angeles." She looked at him with a serenity that disarmed him. "No, Robert, you destroyed your reputation months ago. I just turned on the light." He let out a bitter laugh, walked around the table, and poured himself a glass of wine from the tray. "And this is your revenge? To expose me to everyone? Like a thief?" She replied, "It wasn't revenge. It was a necessary ending. I couldn't keep protecting your lie with my silence." Montgomery cleared his throat slightly, as if to remind him they were not alone. "Mr. Vance," he said dryly, "the documentation presented tonight is legal and valid. You were informed of every movement. Copies were sent to you." Robert raised the glass and emptied it in one gulp. "I don't need sermons, Doctor. I need to understand how we got here." Eleanor breathed slowly. "We got here when you confused success with impunity and love with ownership." He approached, his voice broken between anger and pleading. "Eleanor, everything I have, I built for us." She softly shook her head. "You built it for yourself, and you lost us in the process. I didn't come to argue. Robert, I came to close." She took some papers from the envelope and slid them across the table. "Here is the separation agreement, and the commitment of no media aggression. They are already signed by me. Your signature is missing." Robert looked at the documents, and his breathing became heavy. For a few seconds, the sound of the wall clock was the only thing filling the air. "Do you really think this sets us free?" he murmured. "Yes," she said. "You from your shadows, and me from yours." He threw the empty glass against the fireplace. The glass shattered. Montgomery didn't move. "Please, Mr. Vance," he said firmly. "Don't do any more damage than necessary." Robert walked to the window. He leaned his forehead against the glass. Outside, Los Angeles shone indifferently. "I can't bear to see you so calm," he murmured. "You, who were always the soul of my life, now speak as if I were a stranger." Eleanor moved a few steps closer. "Perhaps because you became that, a stranger. But it's not too late to do the right thing." He looked at her, his eyes tired. "And what is the right thing, Eleanor?" She replied with a thread of a voice. "To accept what you did, apologize, and let each of us rebuild our lives, without destroying anything further." There was a thick silence. Robert slumped into the armchair, covering his face with his hands. "I don't know if I can." Eleanor rested her fingers on the table with a compassionate but firm gesture. "Yes, you can. The only thing you can't do is go back." Montgomery put the papers away in his briefcase. "I'll leave you a few minutes," he said, and discreetly exited. The door closed. Silence fell back over the room. Eleanor looked at him, and for the first time in years, she felt compassion without love. Robert looked up. "Isabella didn't know everything," he said, like someone searching for a belated excuse. "She thought I was free." "I'm not interested," Eleanor replied. "She is already paying the price for her naivete." She approached the window and pulled back the curtain slightly. Rain was beginning to fall over Los Angeles, fine drops hitting the glass. "Look, Robert, even the sky washes away what people stain." He slowly got up, stood behind her. "And you? Are you really just going to leave, just like that?" She didn't turn around. "I'm not leaving you. I'm leaving what we became." Robert raised his hand, hesitating between touching her shoulder and giving up. Finally, he let it drop. "I swear I didn't want to lose you." "And yet you did," she said with a serene sadness. For a moment, everything was suspended. The murmur of the hotel, the scent of spilled wine, the slight crackle of the fire in the fireplace. Eleanor took the documents and held them out to him. "Sign, and end this. For you, for me, for what we were." Robert took the pen, but his hand trembled. "And what if I don't?" he asked, searching for a spark of doubt in her. "Then I will continue alone," Eleanor replied, but this time without fear. Robert signed. The pen scraped the paper with a dry sound. Then he dropped the pen and slumped into the armchair. Defeated. Eleanor folded the papers, put them in the envelope. "Thank you," she said softly. He looked at her from the shadow. "Is that all?" "That is all that remains." She walked toward the door. Before leaving, she paused. "I wish you one thing, Robert, that one day you learn to apologize without expecting absolution." He didn't answer. When the door closed, silence fell like a veil over the room again. Eleanor slowly descended the stairs, holding the envelope against her chest. In the lobby, the maitre d' greeted her with a slight gesture. She replied with a tired smile. Outside, the rain was falling steadily. A car was waiting for her, but she decided to walk. With every step, the sound of the water in the streets brought back her calm. In her purse, her phone vibrated. It was a message from her mother. "I saw you on TV. I'm proud of you. Come home for a few days." Eleanor closed her eyes, her soul relieved. "Yes, Mom," she whispered. "I'm coming." The wind ruffled her hair, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel cold. She walked toward the end of the avenue while the streetlights reflected her silhouette in the puddles. She had signed a peace treaty with her past. Now, all that remained was learning to live in freedom. The train left Union Station as the morning sun caressed the California fields. Eleanor observed the landscape stretching out through the window. Green meadows, small towns with bell towers marking the passage of time. She wore a light scarf and an inner silence that didn't weigh her down, but liberated her. In the seat next to her, an older woman offered her a lemon candy. "They always help on long journeys," she said with a smile. Eleanor accepted it, grateful. San Francisco awaited her with its distinct light, warm and historic, like a promise of rest. Upon arriving, the air smelled of the ocean. The taxi took her through the city until she reached the neighborhood where her mother, Mrs. Carmen, was waiting for her in front of the building with a fan in her hand. "Daughter, finally!" she exclaimed and hugged her tightly. "I saw everything on television. You behaved like a queen." Eleanor smiled tiredly. "I'm not a queen, Mom. I just did what I had to." They went up to the apartment. The aroma of stew and rosemary filled the air. On the dining room table, Her grandmother's embroidered tablecloth was still there, as if nothing had changed. During the first few days, Eleanor avoided talking about the past. She slept late, walked around the neighborhood, and had coffee on the terrace, watching people pass by. The city moved at a different pace. The voices were softer, the time slower. Every morning, Mrs. Carmen left a glass of juice and a small piece of advice on the table. Forgiveness is not always for others, daughter. Sometimes it's for oneself. Eleanor listened, but didn't reply. She had spent so much time holding up her world that now she didn't know what to do with the emptiness. One April afternoon, as the sun set over the rooftops, Carmen found her in the inner patio, watering the flower pots. "I spoke with Father Michael," she said quietly. "He wants to see you. He says it will do you good." Eleanor looked at her, surprised. "To confess?" "No, to talk," her mother replied. "Sometimes God listens better when we don't talk to him about guilt, but about weariness." Eleanor hesitated for a moment. Then she nodded. The next day, she walked to the nearby church. The temple was almost empty. Rays of light pierced the stained glass windows, painting the floor with fire colors. Father Michael, a man with gray hair and a clear gaze, greeted her without ceremony. "Mrs. Eleanor, welcome." They sat on a side bench. He didn't ask anything. He just waited. Eleanor began slowly. "I lost a lot, Father, but I don't know if it hurts because of what I lost or because of what I discovered." He nodded. "Discovering the truth hurts because it forces us to look at ourselves without disguises, but it also cleanses." Eleanor looked down. "I did justice, but I don't feel peace." "Justice is of the mind, daughter. Peace comes from the soul. They are different paths." They remained silent for a while, listening to the echo of a distant bell. Finally, the priest said, "Forgiveness is not forgetting what happened, but stopping living in it. Don't do it for him. Do it for yourself." Eleanor looked at him with a new light in her eyes. "I don't know if I can." "You can try. And while you do, live." That night, mother and daughter had dinner in the patio. The table had bread, olive oil, and a young wine. The air was warm, the sky clear. Carmen raised her glass. "To the women who don't give up." Eleanor smiled. "And to those who teach us to start over." They toasted. The following days brought calm. Eleanor began helping at a small local foundation that supported women in need. She listened to their stories. She watched them sew, learn, and laugh with the shyness of someone who trusts again. Each face reminded her of something about herself. One afternoon, a young woman approached her and said, "Thank you, ma'am. You speak as if everything were possible." Eleanor smiled. "Because it is. You just have to decide." As the weeks passed, she began to write. In a blue notebook, she wrote down thoughts, reflections, and dreams. Freedom is not leaving, but staying without fear. She wrote one morning, as the bells marked noon. The sound seemed like a blessing. One afternoon, as the sun painted the walls orange, Carmen brought her an envelope. "This letter arrived for you." It was from LA. The envelope smelled of new paper and regret. Inside, the familiar handwriting of Robert. Eleanor read slowly. "I am not seeking forgiveness. I just wanted to tell you that I understand you now, that everything collapsed, and I deserve every ruin. Thank you for not shouting. Thank you for letting me fall in silence." She carefully folded the letter without tears. "Mom," she said, "I think it's done." Carmen hugged her. "Yes, daughter, it's done." That night, Eleanor went up to the rooftop. San Francisco shone under a cloudless sky. The lights on the bay trembled in the water like promises. She closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of the ocean air. For the first time in a long time, she felt that her heart was not heavy. Before going to sleep, She opened the notebook and wrote one last line. "There is no greater victory than serenity." Then she turned off the lamp, and the house was enveloped in a sweet silence, the same one that accompanies someone who has finally learned to forgive themselves. The summer came early that year, and San Francisco woke up every day bathed in a golden glow that seemed to bless everything. Eleanor had gotten used to the slow days and the restorative silence of her mother's house. Every morning, before the heat filled the streets, she went for a walk in the neighborhood. She greeted the baker, stopped to buy flowers, and always ended up on the same park bench under an orange tree. There she wrote in her blue notebook words that no longer spoke of pain, but of hope. One morning, while watching a group of children play, she felt a shadow stop beside her. She looked up. It was Isabella Carvalho. The young woman was wearing a simple white linen dress, her eyes sunken with fatigue and a shyness she hadn't had before. "I wasn't sure you would recognize me," she said. Eleanor slowly closed the notebook. "I would have recognized you even among 1,000 people," she replied calmly. There was a tense silence, barely broken by the singing of the birds. "I came to apologize," Isabella said at last, and her voice trembled. "I'm not looking for excuses. I just needed to look you in the eye and thank you for not humiliating me any more than I already did to myself." Eleanor watched her in silence. On the face of that young woman, previously haughty and confident, only vulnerability remained. "Isabella," she said softly, "there is nothing to forgive. The harm done out of ignorance is healed with awareness." Isabella looked down. "I left Los Angeles. I couldn't stay there. No one speaks to me. Doors closed. And sometimes I think I deserve it." Eleanor sighed. Sometimes losing everything is the beginning of something new. A few minutes passed without speaking. The wind moved the leaves of the orange tree, and the scent of the air seemed to wrap them in a truce. "Can I stay here for a few days?" Isabella asked, barely audible. "I have nowhere to go." Eleanor looked at her for a long time before answering. "This house has always had room for those seeking peace, but you'll have to talk to my mother. She decides who crosses her door." That afternoon, Mrs. Carmen received them on the terrace with a floral apron and a firm expression. "So, you're the young woman they talked so much about," she said, without raising her voice too much. Isabella blushed. "Yes, ma'am, and I'm not proud of it." Carmen nodded. "Good. At least you don't deny what you did. In this house, we don't need lies. Only work and silence." The young woman bowed her head. "I'll do whatever it takes." Carmen looked at her for a few seconds, and then smiled lightly. "Then welcome." The following days brought a strange harmony. Isabella helped Carmen in the kitchen, washed dishes, and swept the patio. Eleanor observed her without intervening. At night, the three of them had dinner together, talking little, sharing bread and wine. One of those nights, Carmen said, "Life has a curious way of bringing the right people together at the wrong times." Eleanor smiled, or of giving them a second chance. One morning, while making coffee, Isabella showed Eleanor a folder with documents. "I've been reviewing the foundation's accounts," she explained. "Some projects stopped after the scandal, but I think I can help reactivate them, with your permission." Eleanor took the folder and glanced through it. "You want to work with me?" "I don't want money, only to mend what I helped destroy." Eleanor thought in silence. She had learned that redemption is not imposed. It is offered. If you really want to help, you'll have to do it from the ground up, not as a partner, but as a volunteer. Isabella nodded. "I prefer it that way." Carmen, listening from the doorway, murmured, "That sounds more like justice than punishment." At the end of July, they traveled together to a nearby town to visit one of the shelters supported by the foundation. The heat was intense, and the women there greeted them with tired smiles. Isabella took notes. She talked to the workers. She listened to their stories. On the way back, in the car, she was silent for a long time before saying, "I thought I was coming to repair my image, but I think I'm repairing my soul." Eleanor looked at her sideways. That's what happens when you do good without expecting applause. One afternoon, in the patio, while the two of them were hanging up washed clothes, Isabella stopped. "Eleanor," she said, "I never asked you if you still loved him." Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She looked at the sky, blue and still. Love changes shape. What I felt for Robert no longer exists as it did before. Now I only wish for him to find peace, just like me. Isabella nodded. "Sometimes I think I still love him, and that scares me." Eleanor dropped a garment onto the line. "That doesn't make you guilty. It makes you human." As night fell, the San Francisco sky lit up with red hues. Eleanor wrote in her notebook, "Forgiveness is not a single act. It's a path you travel slowly." She closed the book and left it on the table. Laughter from her mother and Isabella, arguing over a recipe, came from the patio. For the first time in months, the house sounded like home. That night, before sleeping, Eleanor looked out the window. The breeze brought the scent of the ocean, and the moon reflected on the white rooftops. She thought about everything lost, and everything she had found afterward. Serenity, humility, companionship. She hugged herself, without sadness. In the darkness, she understood that sometimes life doesn't give back what it takes, but it offers something better. The possibility of starting over. The autumn began to hint at itself in San Francisco with a softer light, and air that smelled of damp earth and ripe fruit. The city was preparing for the change of season, and in Mrs. Carmen's house, a different, deeper change was also felt. Isabella had regained some color in her cheeks and firmness in her gaze. She spent mornings working with Eleanor on the foundation reports, and afternoons helping the women at the shelter. Eleanor, for her part, had stopped writing about the past. Her blue notebook was now filled with ideas, projects, and names. Life, little by little, had stopped hurting her. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in the patio, Isabella looked up and said, "Eleanor, we have to go back to Los Angeles. Donations haven't been renewed since the gala, and the foundation is in danger." Eleanor rested her pen on the table and looked at her calmly. "Go back? After everything that happened?" Isabella nodded. "Precisely because of that. You can't heal a wound by running away from it." Mrs. Carmen, who was listening from the window, intervened with that wisdom that came naturally to her. "Sometimes you have to go back, daughter, but not to stay, but to properly close the door." 3 days later, the two women boarded the train to Los Angeles. The landscape slowly transformed, from the golden green of the countryside to the elegant gray of the city. Eleanor looked through the window with a mixture of serenity and nostalgia. Isabella was glancing through a folder full of notes. When they arrived, colder air greeted them. They stayed in a small, discreet, and quiet hotel in the city. From the room window, Eleanor could see the trees of the park, already dotted with yellow leaves. The first meeting was held at the foundation's headquarters. Some faces showed surprise when they saw them enter together. An uncomfortable silence swept through the room before one of the counselors said, "Mrs. Eleanor, we didn't expect to see you again." She replied with serenity, "I didn't expect to return either, but the foundation doesn't belong to a person, but to a purpose." Isabella, seated beside her, unfolded the reports and began to talk about the new projects, the progress in the North, and the women who had found work thanks to the program. The numbers, results, and photographs did the rest. When she finished, the same counselor who had spoken first stood up and in a low voice said, "Ma'am, the foundation needs your guidance again. Leaving the building, the sky was overcast, but didn't threaten a storm. They walked down the main street when Isabella stopped. "I didn't expect them to listen to me," she said. Eleanor smiled. Sometimes the truth travels farther than power. They went to lunch at a nearby cafe, where the waiter recognized them and greeted them with respect. "A coffee for the lady, right?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, surprised that someone still remembered that detail. While they waited, Isabella commented, "Do you know what I thought when I saw you at the gala that night?" Eleanor looked at her curiously. "I thought you were going to destroy everything, and instead, you taught us all a lesson." Eleanor looked down at the coffee cup. "I didn't want to teach lessons. I just wanted to be able to look at myself in the mirror without shame." That night at the hotel, Eleanor received an unexpected call. It was Alex Montgomery. "Mrs. Eleanor, there's something you should know. Robert Vance has decided to sell his remaining share of the company and move abroad." Eleanor was silent for a few seconds. "Is he okay?" "As much as possible, yes. He asked me to send a letter to you." "Send it to my address in San Francisco," she replied calmly. She hung up and looked out the window. The city lights twinkled, and for the first time, it didn't hurt to see them. The next morning, they met with a group of young volunteers in the park. There was laughter, plans, and enthusiasm. One of the girls asked Eleanor, "Can you really start over after losing so much?" Eleanor thought for an instant before answering. "Yes, as long as you learn to forgive yourself. The past isn't erased, but it transforms when we look at it with love." Isabella listened in silence, and a furtive tear fell down her cheek. Before returning to San Francisco, Eleanor wanted to visit one last place, the house she shared with Robert. The facade was the same, but the interior was empty. The echo of her footsteps resonated in the naked rooms. In the living room, she stopped in front of the large mirror that still hung on the wall. For years, that mirror had reflected a marriage slowly crumbling. Now it only showed a different woman, firm, fearless. "Thank you," she murmured, as if speaking to her reflection. Then she left and closed the door without looking back. On the train ride back, Mrs. Carmen was waiting for them at the San Francisco station with a wide smile. "Everything resolved?" she asked. "Everything," Eleanor replied. "And better than I imagined." "I knew it," Carmen said, hugging her. "Wounds only heal when you face them." That night, they had dinner together in the patio, with a bottle of wine and a breeze that smelled of jasmine. Eleanor took out her blue notebook and wrote a phrase that seemed to summarize everything. "It's not about starting over. It's about starting truthfully." She left it on the table, next to the empty glass. Isabella, sitting across from her, smiled gratefully. "Thank you for letting me be part of this." Eleanor returned the smile. "Thank you for reminding me that no one redeems themselves alone." The night air filled with the sound of a distant guitar. In the distance, someone was singing a soft tune about forgiveness and lost love. Carmen closed her eyes, satisfied. "Listen," she said. "Even the songs know that life always gives another chance." Eleanor looked up at the stars and thought that, perhaps, finally, fate had learned to be fair.